There's the touch bar for you. You just touch it and it'll stop. Or if I was just to say 100 right here and run that, it just shows me the last value encountered. Now, of course, I can print whatever I want, and that's fine. It'll work exactly as you might expect. Um, but only the last value will come out. You'll see this out here. We've got an in here and an out here. I've never made myself clear enough on exactly what those numbers mean, but they represent the different executions. If I run it again, you'll see the number advances. And I believe that means that you could refer back to prior executions. I'm not really sure. Maybe roll back what you did. I'm not actually sure. There are many features of Jupyter that we're not going to cover, but that, if you do get into using this tool, may be very helpful to you because they've really tricked it out with lots of really cool advantages and features and tools and stuff like that for working. There's one last thing that I want to mention about um, Jupyter Notebook. It's something that could really drive you crazy, so we want to be real clear on it. As I mentioned, any cell, acts sort of as its own program, but the thing is, it's not really because the cell is actually part of a larger program. And I'll demonstrate that by going into a different cell and referring to C. Let's print C right here. I'll just print it just to be clear. And you see that when I execute it, I see the same value that C had before. If I were to, change the value of C and execute this cell, and then I come down here and print C, I'll see the result. So you can see that these cells are actually aware of each other. They're aware of what has occurred previously. But here, and so that in and of itself can cause a problem for you. Because let's say you're working with some variables and you inadvertently work with C without remembering that you had set it up here. Maybe way, way down the line you use a variable that you created much earlier and you didn't realize that it had this value, and suddenly your program doesn't seem to work properly, and it's kind of hard to understand why. And it could be because you're doing something that had been, or that you're building on something that had been established earlier in the earlier cells. One way to kind of, well, yeah, exactly. And so you need to be aware of that. There is a way to clear variables, and I can show that to you right now. This little recycle circlet, what does it say? Restart the kernel. We say, okay, do you want to restart the kernel? All variables will be lost. What that means is that not that you'll lose any of the work that you've written down here, any of the code that you've got in the notebook, but instead that you will only not have the variables set anymore. Let me demonstrate. I'll restart the kernel, and now down here I'll attempt to print C, and this time I get a name error that says that C is not defined. That's because although the text appears here, it has not yet been executed. This is a really important point. It's not so much that the cells are executed from top to bottom like a whole program. It's that they get executed in whatever order you decide to execute them, and that effect is additive. So if I go ahead and run this cell, and then I come down here and run this cell, I'll see that it has a result. But watch this. This is the last really quirky thing. Let's say I change this value in this cell, but I don't run the cell. Again, this is not one big program that gets run like a PY file. It's actually a series of cells that get executed in whatever order you prefer. I can change this value here and come down here and look at C, and C has not changed. Why hasn't C changed even though I changed the formulation of C? The answer is because I didn't execute this cell yet. But if I do execute this cell and then print C, I'll see it change. So you have to keep in mind, especially in a larger notebook, that you're working on a program that is being executed in chunks as you execute cells. Now, there are other ways to execute. You could go run all, or you could run all above or run all below. Depending on how you would like to work, these may be useful to you. You may want to think of all these cells as one big program and run the whole thing every time. That could probably sort of save you a lot of grief when you run into these errors, but you shouldn't be afraid of this error. You should just be aware that if things start to go south, like things are not making sense, it could be because some other cell wasn't executed or some other cell was executed and it's affecting this cell. So one way to fix that is to simply restart the kernel. Restarting the kernel means that Jupyter will reset everything. None of these variables have any values. None of this code has been written yet. And you can feel free now to execute them in whatever order you'd like using any of these commands. So that's the special quirk about Jupyter that I want to relate to you. But now that we're up on Jupyter and we're ready to work with pandas, we should be able to see a really fun and fruitful exercise in learning this fabulous and very powerful module.